This session, Lives Without a Voice, the Other Citizens of Earth, invites us to reflect on a very ethical question. Fundamental ethical question. How do we as societies define responsibility toward those who cannot advocate for themselves? Focusing on non human life, this conversation examines the intersections of law, morality, environmental stewardship, and compassion, and how justice can be extended beyond human boundaries in meaningful and enforceable ways. With that, I now have the honor of introducing our distinguished speakers for this session. We are honored to welcome Justice Athar Minallah, a former judge of the Supreme Court of Pakistan, whose landmark judgments have significantly shaped Pakistan's legal discourse on fundamental rights, environmental protection, and the dignity of all living beings. His work has consistently pushed the boundaries of constitutional interpretation to include ethical responsibility and collective conscience. Joining him is Sarah Gandapur, an animal rights activist whose advocacy has brought attention to systematic issues surrounding animal welfare. Through grassroots engagement and public awareness, she has worked to challenge neglect, cruelty, and indifference, and to promote a culture of empathy and accountability. Moderating this important conversation is Ehtisham Anwar, a civil servant belonging to the Pakistan Administrative Service. He has served in important administrative positions such as Assistant Commissioner and Additional Deputy Commissioner Islamabad, Deputy Commissioner Bahawalpur, and Deputy Commissioner Muzaffarabad, as well as Deputy Commissioner DG Khan and Deputy Commissioner Sahiwal and Commissioner Bahawalpur Division. He has also served as Secretary School Education Punjab, which is in fact the largest department in entirety of Pakistan. He is currently working with an international project on education. He has a rich academic background, and in addition to being a medical graduate, he has done LLB from Pakistan, Bar at Law from the United Kingdom, and Hubert Humphrey Fellowship on Law and Human Rights from the US. He has also done a master's in history. He contributes to national dailies, both English and Urdu, on issues mostly related to human rights. Most recently, he has founded Center for Justice and Rights, which is one of the collaborators for this session. We are grateful to have such thoughtful and committed voices with us today for this vital discussion. Please join me in welcoming our guests with a warm round of applause. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a moderator, but I'll be doing it standing. I feel more communicative, more engaged while standing. So as you heard, I'm a medical graduate and a lawyer and a barrister as well. And most recently, I founded Center for Justice and Rights, and that brings me here. That's about rights. Not only human rights, those are environmental rights, earth rights, and most importantly, animal rights. Also, let me start by thanking Yaqub Bangash and his entire team of LitFest. This is for the first time in Pakistan that at a conference of this scale, an entire panel or session has been dedicated to human animal rights. This wasn't there in original plan. We didn't get a larger hall, therefore, maybe next time. Before we move on to our panelists, as I said, it has been the first time that we are setting stage for animal rights conversation in Pakistan. So we need to show you, we need to set our background for you. We'll take on you guys to the presentation and then we'll move on from there. Presentation lagaiega. As you can see, lives without a voice, the other citizens of Earth. This session has been planned with a purpose. हम ये नहीं चाह रहे कि आप लोग आज की conversation सुने और इसके बाद चले जाएं. हम आपको more informed citizen बनाना चाह रहे हैं animal rights के हवाले से. ऐसे citizen जिनको ना सिर्फ इल्म है बल्कि अगर कोई action लेना है, कोई activism show करना है तो आप वो भी कर सके. तो कुछ चीज़ें मैं दिखाऊंगा. You have been seeing them all around yourself, लेकिन we want you to pause over them, think through them, empathize with the animals you'll see, और probably फिर वहाँ से conversation ज़्यादा meaningful होगी. अगर मैं आप सब से कहूँ कि आप लोग कुछ देर के लिए अपने सर झुका के बैठ जाएं और आपने हिलना नहीं है और इस कैफियत में आपने कई घंटे गुजारने हैं, तो कैन यू इमेजिन किस तकलीफ से आप लोग गुजरेंगे. और अगर आपको उसके साथ साथ खड़ा भी होना पड़े तो किस तकलीफ से गुजर रहे होंगे. तो जिस वक्त हम बात भी कर रहे हैं, इस वक्त भी हज़ारों ट्रक्स पाकिस्तान के तूलो अर्ज में ऐसे सफ़र कर रहे होंगे कि जिसमें एनिमल्स के सरों को, उनकी गर्दनों को खींच के बांध दिया होगा और ये कई घंटे सफ़र करते हुए बाज़ औक़ात तो उनको ड्यूरेंट लाइन भी क्रॉस करना होती है, तो दिन घंटे दिनों में बदल जाते हैं. इससे आगे चलते हैं. ये सीन भी आपने अक्सर ही देख रखा होगा अपनी ज़िंदगी में. बीस्ट ऑफ बर्डन और अपने से ज़्यादा वज़न उठाते हैं और जो इन पे गुजरती है. और एक ये सीन देखिएगा, एक गधे को हमने देखा जो जिसकी ये हालत हो चुकी थी और ये गली मोहल्ले के बच्चों ने उसे खेलते हुए की थी. जैसे जो उसका आजर, जो उसका मालिक है, वो कम नहीं करता, बच्चों ने भी इसमें ऐड कर दिया. इस बैल को देखिए, उसके चेहरे पे डिप्रेशन को देखिए, जो है, जो उदासी, जो क्लापापन, ये भी हम हाईलाइट करेंगे. जो अवारस, जो बीमारियां आप लोगों को एलिमेंट्स होती हैं जिस्मानी, उनसे ये भी गुजरते हैं. उससे बढ़ के कभी आपने सोचा कि जो आप लोग आजकल डिप्रेशन की बात करते हैं और इस तरह के बाकी इश्यूज़ की, तो ये जानवर भी बाकायदा तौर पे जिन हालात में हम पाकिस्तानी इनको रखते हैं, जिबली तौर पे तो ये आज़ाद मंश होते हैं, इन्होंने आज़ाद रहना था, लेकिन हम इनको बंद कर लेते हैं, कैद कर लेते हैं. जो हम फिर इनको खुराक के नाम पे जिस तरह फीड देते हैं, जिन हालात में ये रहते हैं, उसमें ये शदीद डिप्रेशन का शिकार हो जाते हैं हमारे ज़ूज़ में. मैं एक एनिमल मार्केट में गया. मैंने अपनी ज़िंदगी में कभी भी बिल्ली से ज़्यादा फुर्तीला, चुस्त और हर वक्त हिलता जुलता जानवर नहीं देखा. लेकिन इस कदर डिप्रेशन में वहाँ बिल्लियाँ छोटे छोटे पिंजरों में बंद थीं कि खुदा की पनाह. तो ये तस्वीर भी मैंने कैप्चर की और इस जैसी कई बिल्लियाँ वहाँ इसी हालत में बैठी हुई थी. मुर्गियों को तो आपने देख रखा होगा ना, रोज़ आपके खाने में शामिल होती हैं और आप जानते हैं कि द वे वी आर फीडिंग देम, द वे वी आर गेटिंग देम रिप्रोड्यूस्ड, ये अपने पैरों पे भी नहीं खड़ी हो सकती. जिस मुर्गी को हम खा रहे हैं वो स्टीरॉइड्स हैं शायद उसकी फूड में, या कोई और एलिमेंट्स हैं, या जो आर्टिफिशियली उसको हम ग्रो करते हैं, उसका नतीजा ये होता है कि वो अपनी टांगों पे भी ज़्यादा देर खड़ी नहीं हो सकती. ये देखिए, ये सांगड़ की एक तस्वीर है जिसमें एक ऊँटनी रास्ता भटक के साथ वाले खेत में चली गई और साथ वाले मालिक को इतना गुस्सा आया कि उसने कुल्हाड़ी लेके इसकी ये वाली टांग काट दी. और ये पहली दफ़ा मैंने देखा कि किसी जानवर की आंखों में आंसू होते हैं. अगर आप इसकी आंखों को क्लोजली वॉच करें, अगर ये इसके पिक्सल्स बेहतर होते तो आप देखते कि इसकी आंखों में बाकायदा आंसू है. और ये वन ऑफ इंसिडेंट नहीं है. इसके फ़ौरन बाद 2 महीने बाद एक और इंसिडेंट होता है. अब के सखर में अगर اس موقع پہ سول سوسائٹی کھڑی ہو جاتی اور ایون میں کہتا ہوں کہ جوڈیشری بھی نوٹس لیتی, حکومت نوٹس لیتی, تمام متعلقہ محکمے, تو شاید 3 مہینے بعد سومی کے ساتھ ایسا ہی واقعہ نہ ہوتا. سومی ایک اور اونٹنی تھی جو ایک اور کھیت میں پانی پی کے آ رہی تھی, بھٹک کے چلی گئی, اور اس کے ساتھ بھی یہی کیا گیا کہ پہلی تو اس کے ٹانگ کاٹ دی گئی, پھر بھی زمیندار کا غصہ ختم نہیں ہوا اور اس نے اس کو ٹریکٹر سے باندھا اور ٹریکٹر چلانا شروع کر دیا. گھسیٹتا رہا, اس کی ہڈیاں ٹوٹ گئیں, اس کا جبڑا ٹوٹ گیا, اس کی زبان جل گئی, اور پھر وہ خبر میڈیا کی زینت بن گئی, تو کچھ تھوڑا سا اس کو بعد میں میڈیکل کیئر بھی مل گئی. اور دیکھیے بدقسمتی کہ اس کا نام بعد میں چاندنی رکھ دیا گیا جب میڈیا میں خبر گئی. ہونا تو تاریکی یا تیرگی تھا ہمارے ملک کے حالات دیکھتے ہوئے, لیکن بہرحال یہ بھی انسیڈنٹ آپ کے اراؤنڈ ہوا اور آپ نے کبھی نوٹس بھی نہیں کیا, کبھی اس پہ توجہ بھی نہیں دی, کبھی سنا بھی نہیں. وہ ریلز اور پوسٹ ہوتی ہیں نا, وہ مطلب کہاں ٹائم دیتی ہیں کہ ایسے ایشوز کو سنا جائے, دیکھا جائے. ہم بچپن میں پڑھا کرتے تھے, آپ کو یاد ہوگا, اونٹ رے اونٹ تیری کون سی کل سیدھی. تو یہ ریورس نہیں ہو جانا چاہیے جو ہم نے اونٹوں کے ساتھ کیا ہے کہ انسان رے انسان تیری کون سی کل سیدھی. چوہا انسگنیفیکنٹ, ناٹ ٹوٹلی انسگنیفیکنٹ, اس کی اہمیت ہی کیا ہے زندگی میں. یہ بھی آپ کے ہم وطنوں کی تصویر ہے. ایک چوہے کو پکڑا ہے انہوں نے, یہ یوٹیوب سے ہم لوگوں نے پکچر لی ہے اور اس کو اسٹریچ کر دیا ہے. صرف اتنا ہی نہیں, اس کے بعد انہوں نے اسے کھیلنا شروع کیا ہے, اس کو انہوں نے مختلف تنکے چبونا شروع کیے ہیں, اور یہ جو اس کو گدگدی اور جو تکلیف ہو رہی ہے وہ دیکھنے سے تعلق رکھتی ہے. لیکن اگین ملک میں اتنے بڑے بڑے مسئلے ہیں سیاست کے, معیشت کے, ان کی کون بات کرے چوہوں کی. انفیکٹ جب میں نے اس کے اوپر لکھا کوئی ہے جو 20 کروڑ کی ازدحام ایک چوہے کی آواز بنے, تو مجھے میرے دوستوں یاروں نے, پڑھنے والوں نے ریڈیکیول کرنا شروع کر دیا. تو یہ وہ سیٹنگ ہے جس میں ہم نے سوچا کہ آج کا ایک پینل, ایک سیشن آرگنائز کیا جائے اور آپ لوگوں کے ساتھ مل کے سوچا جائے کہ آئندہ کیا کرنا ہے. اور جب ہم نے سیشن کو پلان کیا تو جو سب سے پہلے نام, جب آپ اینیمل رائٹس کی پاکستان میں بات کرتے ہیں اور اینیمل جسٹس کی بات کرتے ہیں, تو جو نام پراپ اپ ہوتا ہے سب سے پہلے وہ جسٹس اطہر من اللہ کا ہے. جس صاحب بہت بہت شکریہ, آپ تشریف لائے ہمارے درمیان, اور وی وڈ آل بی لسننگ ٹو وٹ یو ہیو ٹو سے آن دس ایشو. جسٹس صاحب ویسے تو ہمیشہ سے اگر آپ ان کو پرسیو کرتے ہیں, فالو کرتے ہیں, تو ان کے ڈیسیجنز اور ان کی دیگر اسٹیٹمنٹس میں رائٹس کی بات ہوتی رہتی ہے, ہیومن رائٹس کی بھی, اینیمل رائٹس کی بھی. لیکن جو سب سے زیادہ کوٹ کی جانے والی ان کا ایک فیصلہ ہے, انفیکٹ میں دیکھ رہا تھا کہ وہ انٹرنیشنلی بھی کورٹس میں کوٹ کیا جا رہا ہے ایز اے پریسیڈنٹ, وہ 2020 کا ایک ڈیسیجن ہے جس میں اسلام آباد کا جو زو ہے مرغزار, اس کے حوالے سے وہ ڈیسیجن تھا. اور وہاں پہ ایک ہاتھی تھا کون نام کا, اور وہ اسلام آباد کے رہنے والے جانتے ہیں کہ وہ ہاتھی ہر وقت سر ہلاتا رہتا تھا اور بہت شدید قسم کے کسی ذہنی بیماری کا شکار تھا. جب عدالت کے نوٹس میں آیا, جس کو چیئر کر رہے تھے بطور چیف جسٹس اسلام آباد ہائی کورٹ, تو انہوں نے ایک ڈیسیجن سنوایا جس کے نتیجے میں نہ صرف اسلام آباد کا مرغزار زو کو بند کیا گیا کیونکہ اینیملز کے حالات وہاں اچھے نہیں تھے, بلکہ کون کو بھی ریلوکیٹ کر دیا گیا کمبوڈیا اسپیشل ارینجمنٹس کے ساتھ. اور جو بدقسمتی کی بات ہے پاکستان کے حوالے سے, فار آل دا بیڈ ریزنس ہم اخبار میں ہوتے ہیں, خبروں میں ہوتے ہیں, کہ اس کو دا لونلیسٹ ایلیفنٹ ان دا انٹائر ورلڈ کہا گیا. پوری دنیا میں اس سٹوری نے بہت دھوم مچائی. سر میں اسی طرف آنا چاہوں گا, کنورسیشن کا سٹارٹ آپ سے لوں گا. 2020 کی جو ڈیسیجن جو آیا وہ کیوں اتنا ڈفرینٹ تھا؟ اس سے پہلے کوئی ایسا ڈیسیجن کیا کبھی نہیں آیا, اور کیا اس میں آپ نے پاتھ وے سجیسٹ کیا کہ وہ آج تک کوٹ کیا جاتا ہے؟ You'll be okay, sir. That's great.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here and part of this very prestigious annual event. The coordinator is a civil servant. I was initially informed by Professor Yaqub Bangash, that the session will be on animal rights. But when I looked at the topic, I was a bit confused because it said lives without a voice and other citizens of Earth. I was confused because only yesterday a court of law has declared that speaking about humans who are voiceless, they be the enforced disappearance victims of Balochistan, or the voiceless people of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, or many other voiceless people, is anti-state and an act of terrorism. And I was wondering why a civil servant should take a risk and be a willing coordinator of such a session. But ladies and gentlemen, my experience as a judge and having dealt with the issue of animal rights, I'm extremely humbled because the jurisprudence that evolved from the Islamabad High Court, of which I was an author, was the first judgment in any jurisdiction across the world which independently recognized that non-human animals have rights. But how did I get to this conclusion? It was a jurisprudence which today, again, I'm humbled, is one of the major judgments that is being discussed and taught in every university where the animal rights law is offered. But cruelty to animals and human rights violations are not separate problems. They are different expressions of the same condition, and that is impunity. It is a misconception to discuss and to write a jurisprudence on animal rights without taking into consideration the kind of system that exists in a society. Societies which are governed under the Constitution, a Constitution which guarantees fundamental rights to its citizens, are also enforced. The governance under a constitution is by consent. Elections are not manipulated. And in such a democracy, rule of law is strong and not weak. And in such a society, you do not find voiceless sections or voiceless classes. Strong states are based on, their strength is based on equality. It is based on enforcement of fundamental rights. The problem arises when the system is not democratic, does not have a strong rule of law. It happens in authoritarian and totalitarian states. in a democratic, Pakistan is a democratic country. It has a constitution. The constitution guarantees fundamental rights. The constitution guarantees that there will be fair and free elections and that the country would be governed by the will of the people. This is what is on paper. Is this also something in reality? The reality is known to everyone. But when you have a system in which the constitution is restricted to a piece of paper, the fundamental rights are not enforced, then you have an authoritarian system. And in an authoritarian system, because authoritarian system relies on hierarchies, on status, there is no equality. Even human dignity is subservient to obedience and to order. Immorality is also defined by the authoritarian system. And who suffers the most in such a system? The weakest and the poor, those who do not have a voice. These are symptoms of fragile states and not of strong states. The litmus test of a strong state is to ask a question whether there are any voiceless lives in that society. If there are voiceless voices, and if young people like Hadi Ali Chattha and Iman Mazari, through a judicial order, can be declared as anti-state and terrorist only for raising concerns regarding voiceless people, then you have to ask a question whether we are governed under the Constitution or we live in an authoritarian system. And this was the story of Kawan, the elephant. And I need to give you a background of what had happened, because there were many things which I deliberately did not record in my judgment, because as a nation it would have been embarrassing for us. I was elevated to a high court known as the Islamabad High Court as a judge. Then I served in the same High Court for 4 years as its Chief Justice. And I'm humbled. It is not a claim, but it is a matter of record. The independence of a High Court is judged by the confidence of people in that High Court. In those 4 years, I'm again humbled to say that some fearlessly independent and competent judges were elevated. People from Balochistan, aggrieved people, voiceless people, came to the court and did not leave without the relief. The cases of enforced disappearances start coming to that court. And they all were voiceless people. The only judgment in our jurisdiction relating to enforced disappearances is that from the Islamabad High Court, and that is Myra Sajid's case. The judgment on voiceless prisoners' ordeals also came from that court during that period. And the conditions in which the prisoners, even those who were presumed to be innocent, the way they were treated, they didn't have a voice because that was never highlighted. There were environmental degradation cases that came to that High Court. The victims of eminent domain. Islamabad is a federal capital of this country. And none of us today in this hall would know that the palatial houses and buildings that have been built by the elites in Islamabad have been built on lands that were forcibly acquired and taken from those poor people, and they were never compensated. Their compensation since 1960s remained pending. And while the elites lived there, they never had a voice. But the judgment for them came from the Islamabad High Court. Women and children were being abused. But it was the trust and confidence of the people in an independent court that they approached it. And while all this a constitutional court was dealing with, 3 petitions were filed. And I must mention about those unsung heroes. The first petition came from the Wildlife Board and its chairman. It was regarding refusal by the Capital Development Authority to allow the shifting of a bear from the zoo to the Balkasar sanctuary. The second unsung hero was a medical practitioner, Dr. Umar. He had sought a writ against the government regarding the deplorable conditions in which Kawan the elephant was being held. And the third came from another enthusiast citizen, Miss Faryal, which was regarding the cruel treatment in which stray dogs were killed. These 3 petitions were clubbed. The difficulty for the court was that there was no jurisprudence. I surveyed the jurisprudence from across the country. By then, the jurisprudence that had evolved was from Argentina, the United States, and India. The Indian Supreme Court, regarding the religious event, had given a judgment and had extended the right to life under their constitution's Article 21 to the animals, in this case the cows. However, later the same Supreme Court recalled that judgment, set it aside. In Argentina, there were two judgments. One was regarding limited rights being granted in case of an orangutan, and the other in case of a chimpanzee. But they had only restricted it to the chimpanzee because they made it relatable to the attributes of chimpanzee with the humans. In the United States, there were judgments regarding chimpanzees, a horse named Justice, and then the classic case was that of Happy, the elephant incarcerated in the Bronx Zoo. But in all these cases, though the courts in the United States acknowledged that they were sentient beings, they could feel joy, they could feel pain, that they were not objects, but they didn't grant relief on the ground that under their constitution they were not persons. It is ironic that all the constitutions have been framed in the context of regulating humans and in context of the human rights. It was this personhood which held them back. In our case, though there was only this one petition which related to Kawan the elephant, but I was of a different view. In the background were all those human rights violations that I had dealt with. And I could see how important it was to recognize the rights of the non-human animals. What was the story of Kawan? That is most interesting. In the 1980s, there was a very repressive martial law in this country, ruled by General Ziaul Haq. I don't know how many of you are aware of the atrocities and human rights violations that took place then. I don't know whether you are aware of the colony textile mill incident in Multan, where more than 100 innocent laborers who were raising a voice for their demands were massacred. There were students in Sindh, and the Thori Junction incident regrettably is not known to anyone, where students were massacred. An elected prime minister was unconstitutionally removed and sent to the gallows, for which the Supreme Court, after 40 years, regretted.
Sir, can I briefly interrupt, sir? Actually, there are time limitations. 3 baje session khatam hona tha.
I'll conclude very quickly. Why I'm explaining this, that the same General Ziaul Haq made a request to the Sri Lankan government that his child wanted an elephant. 1-year-old Kavan was abducted, and it had all the attributes of enforced disappearance, and brought and kept for a while in the backyard of General Ziaul Haq's house. And then when Kavan started growing up, a zoo was established. And in that zoo, by the time the petition came before me, there were other 878 non-human animals. And they all were kept in deplorable conditions. The jurisprudence referred to and the judgment referred to built its jurisprudence on one sole ground. Because for a right to exist, there has to be something of intrinsic value which needs to be protected. And that intrinsic value, that thing of intrinsic value, was life. And life was not restricted, is not restricted to humans. And that is what gave recognition for the first time across the globe to the rights of animals. And that is not the only judgment. The most difficult part was to implement that judgment. The implementation, because as a judge, I had learned one thing, that the most important thing for a court is to implement its judgment. The then government, ironically, resisted the judgment. The chairman of the Wildlife Board, who had filed that first petition, was removed by the government for supporting the judgment and for refusing to file a review petition. The review petition was filed by a ministry of the federal government, the Ministry of Climate Change. That was the second judgment I had to render. Again, there was resistance. And the resistance came from everywhere. But the animal rights and this judgment of the of Islamabad High Court resonated with the youth. It was the millennium generation, the alpha generation, and the youngest generation who highlighted the judgment and the ordeals on the social media, which attracted the attention of the prominent singer of the United States, Cher. And when she stepped in, the government of Pakistan surrendered. Internationally, it became a news. She was the one who arranged for relocation of Kavan to Cambodia. The two bears were relocated to a sanctuary in Jordan, and all other animals, in compliance with the jurisprudence of the High Court, were shifted to their sanctuaries. This had never happened anywhere else in the world. And now I'll take a very short, I don't know how many of you have heard about Otter Banga. Has anybody heard about Otter Banga? Can you raise your hand? It's about human history. It's about lives without a voice. It is about human behavior. Ottobanga was 12 or 13 years old child, and in 1904 he was abducted by a United States trader, Samuel Werner, and he was brought to New Orleans to be shown at a fair along with 8 other young people abducted from there. From 9th of September 1906 till the 28th of September 1906, Ottobanga was exhibited in the Bronx Zoo, and the New York Times had a headline on 9th of March inviting people to come and see a human who was being treated as a non-human. Cruelty to animals is a symptom of power without accountability. And that only happens in a society where fear, where oppression, and where there's a lack of respect of human rights. When humans do not have rights, animals are at the lowest rung of power. The entire, I'm grateful to the coordinator. The presentation only speaks volumes for our society. And human rights today, look at, I explained the background of Kavan. In a repressive, authoritarian society, compassion, empathy, and care becomes optional. It is not for the weaker classes. And when the elite act with impunity and its own interest, the most weakest are the victims. And the weakest possessing a life is an animal. We, as a society, have to put an end to normalization of violence. When everyone sees everyday violence against humans, animals do not matter. And what has to put really, it's my generation, whatever damage it could have do to this country has almost, but at least we owe it to the younger people to whom we would be shifting the baton to at least tell them the truth. And why I say that there is normalization of violence, because what happened yesterday to 2 young lawyers who have been declared as terrorists, this does not happen in a democratic state where we claim that it is governed under the Constitution. Violence is normalized. When someone like Dr. Yasmeen Rashid, who's 70 years old, cancer suffers because she is a prisoner of conscience. But this has happened throughout our history. We need to learn. And yes, animal advocacy is extremely important. It challenges the authoritarian system. It is non-partisan, but it teaches the citizens in thinking in terms of rights. I am grateful to the coordinator for giving me this time, but we can only move forward. And the day when there are no voices that we can claim to be voiceless, that is when Pakistan will not see any cruelty to animals. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. सारा आपका हमने टाइम जो है we've encroached upon your time, लेकिन let me come back to you again. As we had introduced, she is a fashion designer, she has been a media person, and today she is here because she is an animal rights activist as well. You formed an organization, as far as I know, Saya. And I would request you to remain focused on animal rights for today. So, क्या है आपकी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन क्या करती है और बताइए सबको, फिर हम उससे कोई क्वेश्चन भी करेंगे आपसे सब्सिक्वेंट.
Hello. Assalamu alaikum ji, I'm Sara Gandapur and we've formed an organization called Saya Animal Welfare. First of all, I want to begin with saying thanks to Thinkfest for having us and to Athar Saab, and it has been an honor for me to be on the same panel with Justice Saab. My father was also a justice, and I think, inherited judiciary in my blood, and I owe so much respect and thanks to Justice Saab for making that amazing judgment, giving that amazing judgment that that helped Kawan move from Pakistan to Cambodia. Focusing on animal rights has been a passion for me because I grew up with a father and a family that was very close to animals. We were brought up and groomed as animal lovers. And जैसे भी आप अगर कहना चाहेंगे कि हमें हमेशा यही सिखाया गया कि एनिमल्स जो हैं उनमें भी अल्लाह ताला ने रूह फूकी है. So they are as alive as we are as humans. But I think a lot of families are so scared of the fact that, you know, इसमें कुछ Islamic elements भी होते हैं, कुछ social elements हैं कि जी जैसे जानवर पाक नहीं होते या वो हमसे कम हैं क्योंकि वो जानवर हैं. जानवर का मतलब ये है कि वो जानदार हैं, उनमें भी जान है जैसे हमारे में जान है. So this grew as a passion, but it became a mission after achieving, you know, a lot of milestones in my life as a designer, as a journalist, as an editor, as a media personality. But the thing that was closest to my heart was always working for animal rights, and animals are voiceless. They speak. ऐसा नहीं है कि वो बोल नहीं सकते, बट वो अपनी ज़बान बोलते हैं और उनकी ज़बान समझना थोड़ा मुश्किल है, लेकिन उनके एक्शंस ऐसे होते हैं कि आपको हमेशा समझ आती है कि वो आपसे क्या कन्वे करना चाह रहे हैं. आई वॉज़ वेरी फॉर्चुनेट एंड लकी कि मुझे अपने साथ कुछ ऐसे फेलो एक्टिविस्ट मिले, ऐसे लोग मिले जो मेरा पैशन शेयर करते थे या मिशन शेयर कर रहे हैं कि हम लोगों ने सिर्फ अपने लिए नहीं सोचना, अपने से बाहर निकलना है. और अल्लाह ताला ने हमारे साथ इस ज़मीन पर सिर्फ इंसानों को नहीं पैदा किया, चरिंद परिंद और पानी में रहने वाले भी जानदार हैं. हमें सिर्फ उन्हें एक्सप्लॉइट नहीं करना, वो हमारे लिए कोई इसलिए नहीं पैदा किए गए कि हम सिर्फ उन्हें खाएंगे और खाते जाएंगे. पैदा करेंगे, खाएंगे, सब्ज़ी नहीं है, जानदार चीज़ है, उसको हम कल्टिवेट नहीं कर सकते, हम मैन्युफैक्चर नहीं कर सकते एक प्रोडक्ट की तरह. सो जैसे कि एहतशाम साहब ने बहुत ज़बरदस्त अपनी प्रेजेंटेशन में दिखाया कि एनिमल राइट्स सिर्फ स्ट्रीट डॉग्स तक, गली के कुत्तों तक, बिल्लियों तक, गायों तक और हैंस और ये जो सारे चीज़ें हम मवेशी खाते हैं उन तक लिमिटेड नहीं है. सो वी नीड टू एज अ सोसाइटी गिव रिस्पेक्ट टू एनिमल्स जो हमारे साथ अर्थ शेयर कर रहे हैं. और थिंक फेस्ट को मैं दाद देना चाहूँगी कि उनने इतने ज़बरदस्त इंटरनेशनल प्लेटफॉर्म पे ہم جیسے لوگوں کو، خیر جج صاحب تو بہت آنریبل ہے لیکن بہت جونیئر ہے ان سے، لیکن ہم جیسے لوگوں کو، جن کو اکثر لوگ پاگل کہتے ہیں کہ یار یہ پاگل ہے، انسانوں کو رائٹس نہیں مل رہے، جانوروں کے پیچھے پڑے ہوئے، کیا پاگل ہے یار، یہ پاگل ہے، عورت کتوں کو کھانا ڈالتی ہے، یہ پاگل ہے یار، یہ اپنے پیسے برباد کر رہے ہیں جانوروں پہ. سو I am proud to be that pagal, and I will continue to being a pagal, and I will always fight for animal rights, because حضرت علی کا کال ہے نا کہ میری حکومت میں ایک کتا بھی پیاسا نہیں رہنا چاہیے. اگر ہم اپنے آپ کو مسلمان کہتے ہیں یا انسان کہتے ہیں، تو اگر حضرت علی ایک پیاسے کتے کی جواب دہ ہوں گے اللہ کو، تو ہم انسان کیا جواب دہ نہیں ہوں گے اللہ تعالیٰ کو، جو کتوں کو مروا رہے ہیں، جانوروں کے ساتھ ایسا سلوک کر رہے ہیں، مرغیوں کو 45 ڈیز میں پیدا ہو کر بڑا کر کے عجیب چیزیں اسٹیرائڈس دے کر ہم وہ کھا رہے ہیں. سو ایٹ لیسٹ اگر آپ کو جانداروں کی فکر نہیں تو اپنی ہیلتھ کی فکر کر لیں کہ وی نیڈ ٹو بی کیئرفل آف واٹ وی آر کنزیومنگ اینڈ ایوری اینیمل ہیز رائٹس. سو آئی ایم ولنگ ٹو ٹیک مور کویشچنز اف یو وڈ لائک ٹو.
ہاں جی، وی اسٹریچنگ اوور اسٹریچنگ ان فیکٹ. تو ہم ایسا کر لیتے ہیں کہ ہم آپ لوگوں کے پاس آتے ہیں، ہم لوگوں نے بول دیا. میری گزارش یہ ہوگی کہ ہم تھوڑا فوکسڈ رہیں، اپنا ہمارا جو کویشچن ہے وہ اینیمل رائٹس کے گرد رہے، کیونکہ اور بہت سے یہاں پہ سیشنز ہو رہے ہیں جس میں آپ اپنی سوالوں کی تشنگی کو دور کر سکتے ہیں. لیکن ہم پہلے کویشچنز لے لیں گے، 3 کویشچنز، اور پھر میں اکارڈنگلی اپنے پینلسٹ کی طرف آؤں گا. سو جی the girl at the back. Yes, but please be louder.
Okay, so my question was basically from Sir Athar Minallah. Sir, the thing is that, see, you and I, actually it's from all of you, you and I, we are privileged enough to be sitting here and talking about animal rights today. And you know, we can maybe talk about all the things that we think that are missing from our lives, from our society as a whole, right? But the thing is that this talking, in my opinion, is not going to genuinely have an impact on the lives of these animals, because we can learn to be empathetic, but at the same time, the people who are using these animals as a means for their, living, they are going to keep doing that. And that is not going to be changed until we give them more incentives. The state gives them more incentives, or people like us, we do it for them, we tell them, we give them alternative ways of earning a living, right? So the poultry farms, they are going to keep doing whatever they're doing. And what do you think is a concrete solution to this problem that's happening in the society?
Thank you, lady. مختصر سوال جی پلیز. آپ بول دیجیے، ہم سن رہے ہیں.
فار ایگزامپل اکنامکس کے 3 بچے ہیں، تو وہاں پہ لا کے 10 سے 15 بچے ہیں، اور میں نے نوٹس کیا یہ ٹرینڈ کہ پاکستان میں بہت زیادہ بچے لا کر رہے ہیں. مجھے اس کے پیچھے موٹیویشن سمجھ نہیں آتی کہ اتنے بچے لا کیوں کر رہے ہیں، اور آپ اس کو کس طرح دیکھتے ہیں کہ جس طرح میں دیکھتا ہوں، میں نے تو یہ انالائز کیا کہ جتنے بچے لا کر رہے ہیں ان کا حال ڈاکٹرز اور انجینئرز اور ان دا ارلی 2000 جو ٹیلی کام انجینئرس کے ساتھ ہوا تھا وہ ہوگا، کیونکہ اتنے مارکیٹ میں جگہ نہیں ہے اتنے سارے لائرس کو اکاموڈیٹ کرنے کی. ون اینڈ لٹل کنورسیشن کنٹروورشل کوسچن اف یو وڈ لائک ٹو کمنٹ آن دیٹ. دا 27th امینڈمنٹ.
تھینک یو. پہلی بات تو یہ کہ یہ آپ کا کویشچن اینیمل رائٹ سے ریلیٹڈ نہیں ہے، تو انفارچونیٹلی مجھے ڈسریگارڈ کرنا پڑے گا. اور دوسری بات یہ ہے کہ اگلے سیشن کے پینلسٹ آنا شروع ہو گئے ہیں، اس لیے میں ڈس رسپیکٹ نہیں شو کر سکتا ان کی طرف. ہم کویشچنس یہاں پہ 2 کویشچنز آ گئے. ایک کویشچن سر میں بھی پٹ اپ کروں گا، بڑا ایسا کویشچن ہے جس کا آنسر مجھے نظر نہیں آ رہا. سر پاکستان میں اسٹرے ڈاگس کا بہت بڑا مسئلہ ہے، اور ہم یہ بھی دیکھ رہے ہیں کہ بہت سے حادثات ہو رہے ہیں، بچوں کو بھنبوڑ کے کتوں نے بہت سی جگہوں پہ مار دیا، اور اسی طرح کے بہت سے معاملات. دوسری طرف یہ کہا جا رہا ہے کہ ان کو مار دیا جائے, ان کو زہر دے دیا جائے. پھر اینیمل رائٹس ایکٹیوسٹ آ جاتے ہیں جو کہتے ہیں ایسا نہیں کیا جا سکتا. تو ہمیں پاکستان کی سچویشن میں کوئی پریکٹیکل سلیوشن بتائیے جس میں یہ اسٹرے ڈاگس کا مسئلہ بھی حل ہو جائے اور ان کے رائٹس بھی رہ جائیں. تو سر 3 سوال آپ کی طرف میں لے کے آ رہا ہوں. ایک, انہوں نے کہا کہ کیا اینیمل رائٹس کو ہم لیونگ بینگ کے رائٹس کے طور پہ ٹریٹ کریں گے, تو وہ آپ کی ڈیسیجن نہیں, انفیکٹ اس میں بیٹا ڈیسائیڈ کر دیا تھا کہ وہ ایک لائف رکھتے ہیں اور وہی رائٹس ہوں گے. انہوں نے سوال کیا کہ ہم کیا انسینٹیوز دیں گے کہ لوگ پابند ہو جائیں, اویئر ہو جائیں. اور فائنلی اسٹرے ڈاگس کے حوالے سے میں آپ دونوں سے سوال پوچھوں گا.
دیکھیے جی, جہاں تک اسٹرے ڈاگس کا میں نے اپنے اس میں بھی بتایا, وہ جس ججمنٹ کا آپ نے ذکر کیا اسی میں اس کا ذکر ہے. دی اسلام آباد ہائی کورٹ ہیلڈ اٹ انلیگل اینڈ اگینسٹ دیئر رائٹس کہ اگر ان کو کسی بھی کرول طریقے سے مارا جائے. دنیا بھر میں طریقے ہیں, اور اسلام آباد کیپٹل ڈیولپمنٹ اتھارٹی نے ایک فیسلٹی کریٹ کی تھی, اسٹیبلش کی تھی, جس میں صرف ان کو پکڑ کے نیوٹر کر کے اور پھر ان کو پھر ریلیز کرتے تھے, یا موسٹلی جو ہے اڈاپٹ کرنے کے لیے پیش کرتے تھے, اور لوگ اڈاپٹ بھی کرتے تھے. تو ساری دنیا میں یہ چیزیں ہو رہی ہیں. یو ڈونٹ ہیو ٹو بی کروئل ٹورڈز دی اینیملس. جہاں تک میرے بھائی نے ذکر کیا, اسلام آباد ہائی کورٹ کے علاوہ اسلام آباد ہائی کورٹ کے بعد صرف کانسٹیٹیوشنل کورٹ آف ایکویڈور نے ججمنٹ دی تھی, اور ججمنٹ دی ہے جو انڈیپینڈنٹلی اینیملس کے رائٹس کو ریکگنائز کیا. لیکن ان کو ایڈوانٹیج یہ تھا کہ ان کے کانسٹیٹیوشن میں دیر از اے فنڈامنٹل رائٹ گارنٹیڈ, اینڈ دیٹ از رائٹ ٹو نیچر, جس کی وجہ سے اس عدالت کو باقی یس آئی مین آئی بلیو دیٹس ان مائی ججمنٹ جس طرح انہوں نے کہا. تو دیکھیے جی, سمپل سی بات یہ ہے کہ جس معاشرے میں رول آف لا نہیں ہوگا, جس معاشرے میں طاقت کے لمٹس نہیں ہوں گے, جس معاشرے میں امپیونٹی ہوگی اور اکاؤنٹیبلٹی نہیں ہوگی, اس معاشرے سے آپ نہ ہیومن رائٹس ختم کر سکتے ہیں, اور اینیمل رائٹس کی بات کرنا جو ہے, جس طرح اس ینگ بچے نے کہا, would only be fashionable. تو اگر پریکٹیکل ہے, the society has to think about changing its approaches, اور جو ایک نارملائزیشن آف وائلنس ہے, it has to put an end to this.
ہاں جی, to answer your question, it's not only fashionable. Most of us are working day and night to highlight the cause of working for animal rights. So you can't negate our hard work. There are millions of activists around the world, but in Pakistan, there are leading activists like myself and Aiza Appa, who's also here, who's joined us as well, and many other activists in Islamabad, in Lahore, in Karachi, who are working for this. انسینٹیوز تو ہم تب دیں گے جب ہم پہلے پبلک کو ایجوکیٹ کریں گے. ابھی تو ہم اویئرنیس لیول پر آئے ہیں, اور اب تو ہم لوگ سارے ایکٹیوسٹ مل کر کورٹس تک جا رہے ہیں, اور کسی بھی ملک میں کوئی بھی کام کرنے کے لیے آپ کو عدالت کا دروازہ کھٹکانا پڑتا ہے, اور اس کے لیے ہم لوگ چاہے وہ لا امپلیمنٹ ہو یا نہ ہو, لاز بنے ہیں, لاز پاس ہو رہے ہیں, ہو چکے ہیں, لیکن ہم لوگوں کا کیا کام ہے کہ میڈیا کے تھرو ہم اس کاز کو, اس چیز کو ہائی لائٹ کریں کہ ہمیں امپلیمنٹیشن چاہیے ہے. ہمیں گورنمنٹ آف پنجاب سے ریکویسٹ کرنی ہے کہ جو ہر گلی میں, ہر سوسائٹی میں, ہر میونسپلٹی میں اینیملس کی, ڈاگس کی کلنگ ہو رہی ہے, اس کو اسٹاپ کریں, بیکاز لا بن چکے ہیں, امپلیمنٹیشن چاہیے. نمبر 1, آپ نے جیسے سر نے کہا کہ جی گلی گلی میں کتے کاٹ رہے ہوتے ہیں, دے آر ریپسٹ and their abusers and many other criminals that are roaming our streets freely. We don't capture them and just neutralize them and then throw them out in the society. We are not punishing those people. اور اگر اوور پاپولیشن ہو رہا ہے تو ایسا تھوڑی ہوتا ہے کہ ہم کہتے ہیں کہ سب انسانوں کو جمع کرو, ان کو مار دو کیونکہ اوور پاپولیٹ ہو رہے ہیں. تو کرمنلز تو انسانوں میں بھی ہیں. कुछ केसेस हैं जिधर डॉग कलिंग डॉग बाइट्स हुए हैं, और वो भी इसलिए क्योंकि जब आप एक माँ को उसके बच्चों को मारते हैं या बच्चे उनके छोटे छोटे पपीज़ को उठा के ले जाते हैं, तो एक माँ ने अपने बच्चों की हिफाजत करनी है, वो काटेगी। जैसे एक इंसान अगर औरत के बच्चे को उठाएंगे तो वो अपने बच्चों के लिए, राइट्स के लिए फाइट करेगी। तो जब एनिमल फाइट करता है तो आपको बुरा लगता है। आप ये तो देखते हैं कि उनने बच्चों को काटा, आप ये नहीं देखते कि वो बच्चे जो उनको ईंटें मारते हैं, पत्थर मारते हैं, उनको स्टिक्स मारते हैं, उनको खाना नहीं देते, खाना ज़ाया हम कर देते हैं, तो उनकी भी तो राइट है ना टू लिव इन दिस कंट्री। दे आर सिटीजन्स ऑफ पाकिस्तान एंड वी हैव नो राइट टू डू वट एवर वी आर डूइंग टू दैम। और तीसरी और आखिरी बात जो मैं कहना चाहूँगी वो ये है कि TNVR, ट्रैप न्यूटर वैक्सीनेट रिलीज, ट्रैप करेंगे आप जानवरों को, गवर्नमेंट को मिलते हैं फंड्स कि आप उनको करें, आप एनिमल्स को उठाएं, उनको न्यूटर करें, वैक्सीनेट करें और उनको वापस रिलीज़ कर दें विद कॉलर्स। ये हुआ है बहुत सारी सोसाइटीज़ में, लेकिन क्या होता है कि कुछ लोग स्ट्राइक्स कर देते हैं, प्रोटेस्ट आ जाती है कि जी जानवर जो हैं वो इंसानों के पीछे पड़ जाते हैं, और उन न्यूटर्ड और TNVR हुए हुए डॉग्स को पॉइजन कर देते हैं। तो फिर हमें ये क्यों बुरा नहीं लगता जब हम छोटी छोटी जानों को जहर दे के मारते हैं या उनको बुलेट से शूट कर देते हैं। तो हमें पहले अवेयरनेस फैलानी है, एजुकेट करना है, हमेशा नेगेटिव बात को नहीं हाईलाइट करना चाहिए। कुछ पॉजिटिव्स भी हुए हैं पाकिस्तान में, और हमारे जो सिलेबस है उसमें यूनिवर्सिटी लेवल्स के ऊपर उनने एनिमल राइट्स को इंट्रोड्यूस किया है। सो नाउ इज़ द टाइम कि हम इस चीज़ को हाईलाइट करें और गवर्नमेंट से भी सपोर्ट की उम्मीद रखते हैं।
Karan ji, thank you. This brought us to the very end of the session.
It's how we do things often when the system is inaccessible to us. But I think the positive part, and I guess Alex was fundamental in proposing this title, so he can expand on it a little bit more. But my sense as a social scientist was that we always create a kind of moralistic divide between formal and informal. So formal is always good. It's sort of written in statutes, it's the established way of doing things on paper. That's the de jure domain. But there's a de facto domain which is based on different types of informal networks we have, different types of social norms, and it's often based on our tribal affiliation, kinship group, in Pakistan what we describe as biradaris, these networks. And you use these social networks to get things done. If you're applying for admission in a college, or you need some, put in a good word, if there's some other hiccup in the way you access the state, you're probably going to use somebody that you know. And it's the interesting thing about this sort of stuff is that it's usually two-way exchange, in the sense that we have mutually binding obligations of sorts. So people do that for each other. It can, on the ground, it could also be a contingent exchange, in the sense that it is contingent on doing something. If you're asking somebody for favor, they will also think, can the person also help us in some other way? And in Pakistani context, it's sifarish, but it's a fairly ubiquitous feature across the developing world. And Alex has an interesting paper, a book chapter on this, where he talks about Guangxi in China, which has a similar concept. It's all based on personalized connections, how you access different things through personalized connections. Dash in Nigeria. And you didn't mention Wasita, but the region that I study a lot as well, the Middle East, everybody would talk about Wasita, which is, what sort of connection you could use to access jobs or other kind of services. So it's not just a Pakistani conception. And it's not just about formal, informal divide. So firstly, let me ask Alex to expand on what he meant by positive sifarish, just to set the terms of the debate before I turn to Lashari Sath.
Well, thank you very much, and it's really nice to be back in Pakistan. I have been coming in and out of Pakistan for 30 years, and used to live here, not in Lahore, alas, but in Islamabad. But it's a real pleasure to be back here, and Thinkfest is such a great thing to gather in Lahore with ideas and discussions like these that have been happening the last 2 days. So, as you set out, I mean, I think there's something here, you know, if we think about the pattern of the last few hundred years of history, we've moved from systems that were informal, generally, to the idea that formality equaled progress, right? So formality equaled progress if you thought about colonialism and the structures around that. Formality equaled progress if you thought about the nature of the modern state, right? So actually, using informal systems was seen as, in some ways, backward or wrong or immoral or corrupt or chalaki, rather than representing the way one should do things, which should be formal, systems-based, rules-based, delivered for institutions. And I think that version of history deserves a little bit of challenge, because actually we live in a world today where we still see the informal operating alongside the formal. That's not just true in Pakistan, it's true in the UK, it's true in the US. It may manifest itself in slightly different ways, but it's present in pretty much everywhere around the world. And that's why these words like guanxi and sifarish, blat in Russian, which means pull, guanxi by way of Mandarin literally means connections. So these are all pretty similar concepts in many ways. It's particularly important, I think, for another reason, which is we're about to go into a phase where technology is and automated systems are likely to replace systems where people are part of them, right? So as a recovering bureaucrat, right, at least I was the person in the bureaucratic system who would apply the system. If you're then talking about a system which is going to be applied through our devices or through AI, the rules and the system will dominate decision-making. And we all know that even in the most perfect system, mistakes get made, right? That sometimes there'll be maladministration, sometimes the decision won't be fair, sometimes there really are exceptional reasons why the rules and the system that lead to a decision might not be what you need to do. And it's fine, of course, if you can come up to a senior official and ask for it to be reconsidered. But we should worry about a world we're moving into where potentially that ability to manage exceptions will be even more limited, right? Because in essence, if we're lucky, we'll get a chatbot. If we're unlucky, we'll just get a computer says no. So it's for that reason that I wanted us to think about it. And now, what I'm not talking about here is corruption. I'm not talking about here the ability to malignly influence policymaking. I just wondered if there's a way to think about sifarish in a slightly different way. We all laugh about it. It's informal. It's the language of the home and of friends and of braderie and of networks. But is there a way to revalorize sifarish and say, actually, there are ways in which sifarish can be used to apply fairness, to manage the cases where citizens are not treated fairly by a system? And is there a way of thinking about the ways in which sifarish also provides a welfare system and a safety net sometimes when governments and states and systems fail? So that was my opening pitch on it.
Great. I mean, I was going to come to that, the larger conception of inequality of access and opportunity, which exists, as you say, across the world, where networks play that role. So the informal is actually signaling to what may be the problem with formal. So in the Middle Eastern context, for example, when I study business trade relations, you find 90% of the firms as informal in Egypt, 92% in Lebanon. Now, there's a lot of discussion about let's formalize this informal sector, which is fine. And a lot of it comes in the Pakistani lexicon on smuggling. Smuggling is a bad word. But it always signifies what is considered illegal is actually illegal because of the way in which the legal system works. So you cannot understand the informal without the formal. Now, a lot of the firms in Egypt are informal because there's a high cost of formality. Because the formal sector, the way it's governed and functioned, it makes it very difficult. So we'll come back to that larger idea about inequality of access. But I think it would be really good to have, Lashari Saab is a retired bureaucrat, but huge experience. He was deputy commissioner in Lahore twice. He was the head of, chairman of CDA. He's worked through the civil service, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who would have approached him for, can you help me do this or that? And he must have used his judgment on, okay, here is a more sort of innocuous case. Here it is going to matter a lot more. So an insider perspective, because a lot of the Sifarish is about accessing the state.
Thank you for having me in. And this particular topic is the first of its kind, very interesting, and I was intrigued by it because positive Sifarish is not something which we have talked about much about it. So, but I was wondering, Sifarish could be for valid reasons also, to have your due right also, your or your friends or relatives or anybody's. But we do not distinguish between a Sifarish where you're asking for something undue and something which is due. In Urdu or in our local language at least, I do not see the difference, while there should be one. Because when you're pushing for something which is due to you or to your friend or relative, I think there's nothing wrong about it. In fact, you're doing a good thing. So that is a Sifarish which we should not hesitate. And I do not hesitate making that Sifarish for my villager or for my servant or for my friends or anybody, because if it's within the context of legality and sometimes, a lot of times, bureaucracy sleep over a file. They are not taking any decision. So unless you shake them up, you put in a word, so the things start moving. So drawing attention, knocking at the door, just sensitizing somebody for something where I think there is a rightful thing, so that is a positive Sifarish, I take it like that. But if you're pressing somebody or someone is pressing you to do something just because that person is very influential and they're wanting you to compromise with the rules, with the merit, and it's for some ulterior motives, then that's a test case where you have to, as a civil servant, as an administrator or manager, whatever you want to call it, have to sift between right and wrong, and how then there is a certain band which could be discretionary also. It is neither strictly right nor strictly wrong. So if there is a Sifarish, you can probably go to the borderline and still manage it. But if there is something blatant, wrong, illegal, then you have to draw a line, and you can't just comply with this. So at times you pay a cost. I can narrate many stories where I was shunted out even as Deputy Commissioner Lahore, there was a clerk of mine, a settlement clerk, who dealt with the land matters, but he was a notorious guy, very well linked with the, he was a wizard in the land matters. He was linked right with the top man of the country, the President of Pakistan. And at the airport, I would stand there as a protocol. Protocol is that Deputy Commissioner always see off the head of the state. So I was there with the SP, and this guy would hold a briefcase and would step into Falcon number 1 with the President. So I knew his connection. But we got to find that he was involved in some fraud in some embezzlement in the treasury of the district Lahore. So I got very upset and we took a very stern action against him. And, lodged the FIR, conducted inquiry. And when that was proved, because it was a very proven thing, then I got a call from the MS to the president. I got call from the governor house. I got call from everywhere to overlook it or be mild about it and this and that. But somehow I had resolved that I won't let it go. So I dismissed him from service, and next day I got my transfer orders. So I knew this will happen, but that's the cost sometimes you have to pay.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think in a way you've highlighted another dimension, and I think our objective today is to really unpack this term. If you're able to unpack by the end of the session, then that'll be a success. In a sense, what you're telling us is that the state can be often inaccessible, and perhaps we need to think about who is included, who is excluded. There is always, when you talk about formal, informal, there is a dimension of the insider-outsider dynamic. And so do you think that we should actually, when you're thinking, for example, somebody's asking you to help him make a national identity card and the person has all the things that he needs, that's just a legal right. And you would just help him. But then there are certain forms of sifarish that can actually, it's not a matter of inclusion, but it actually could exclude others. And your last example kind of hinted at that it's there's a private interest, but if you follow through the sifarish, that is actually going to be against the public benefit. So do you think there's a larger question about insider-outsider dynamics, which makes sifarish such a tricky concept?
There's a lot of times it's how you wish to look at it, or it's a borderline thing. But a lot of times it is required, particularly in a society like ours, where there are people who are uneducated, who are poor, who do not have access. What to talk about access? They do not understand. My wife keeps asking me, can't there be an office you people work for bureaucracy to just even let these servants and poor guys know where to go? They do not even know where to go. So they're as ignorant, naive, and dispossessed that they do not even know which office to go. So unless there's someone to guide them, to push them, which is kind of a safarish, and I think that's how our society is running. If we don't own up this section of the people and do not pull out a card and write something for them, and so when I sit in my office, half the people who come to meet me are with some kind of a card. That is all right as long as somebody's trying to draw my attention. But the problem is only when somebody is with a totally illegal thing or trying to demolish someone else's merit. Then it is for you to understand that. But positive safarish, I think, is very important, and without that, society like ours won't go very far.
Again, you've highlighted a very fascinating dimension, which is how the state, when it's inaccessible, you're trying to include people through that process. A lot of our judicial system still operates in English language. So for a lot of people, even when you set out the rules, they don't know how to access it. Or if they are going to the police station, they don't know about their rights. Before they enter the police station, there are always brokers sitting there, and you don't know how they're going to behave. So in a way, that form of sifarish effectively is trying to include people in a system that is actually inaccessible. Let me turn to Alex. And while talking about this, it's something struck to me about what I teach at Oxford. In Oxford, when we talk about the enforcement environment, I teach a course in political economy. There's a term that Douglas North uses, which is about the existence of a third-party neutral actor, which is often the state. The state is defined. Now we know nowhere in the world the state is really a third-party neutral actor, because people who control the state have their own objective function. But particularly in developing countries, where the state is seen as not only inaccessible, it's actually not a neutral third-party actor. And so in that context, then Sifarish or this sort of informal dealing takes another angle. How much of that do you think is important to take account of in this discussion?
So thanks. I mean, look, I think it is clearly the case that in states where it's even more difficult to access government services, for example, the need to use those informal channels to reach the state may be even greater. But I'd say even in states that are wealthy, even states that are well developed, the state can feel quite remote from citizens. And let's just think about our phones for a minute, because I'm sure you haven't been thinking about them for the last 2 minutes. But let's think about the experience we have on our phones. We have user experience that's designed into our devices. How easy is it to use? Is this app better than that app? Should we, how accessible, how readable is information? Should there be a more user-friendly way to access the service? That's built into modern technology, particularly modern app-based ecosystems on phones. That's not the starting point for most of government technology, and I teach GovTech, government technology at LSE, among other things. And governments are in a challenging position. We can't always invest. I say this as a former bureaucrat. We can't always invest as much money in most systems. But the design principles are different, right? Who are you going to come to if you want a visa? Well, your government. Who are you going to come to if you want to pay taxes? Well, your government, right? You haven't got the option of saying, am I going to go with this provider or that provider? So I think that actually there's often a similar need for positive sifarish in developed country and wealthy country environments, because you still have the challenge of accessibility of the state and how user-friendly the state may feel or not. But there is a point that I think has come up, which is a really fair challenge to this, which is, do you have somebody's number or not? Do you have sifarish? Who do you know? And if I think about my time, I worked in 10 Downing Street as an advisor to the Prime Minister. There were people who had my WhatsApp number and my Signal number, and there were people who did not have my WhatsApp number and my Signal number. And that's probably the biggest division, right? One river goes off this way, one river, there's a Jhelum and the Chenab, right? Two different rivers. So there's a bit of an unfairness built into that, which is how do you make sure that what you don't have is a system that is still quite two-track, right? It's a system that it's a motorway system to Islamabad for people who've got the number. It's a GT road for the people who haven't got the number. And I think that I think that design issue is a bit of a challenge. Is you want to have positive sifarish, but how do you make sure that actually that positive sifarish is reasonably accessible to the different types of people who need it? And that I think is a challenge as well.
Again, I think what you used a word which obviously for those of us who are economists, but maybe others too, deal with a lot, which is information. And so when an economist look at questions, they say, well, they're informational imperfections. You're going to get a bank loan, and the banker doesn't know how creditworthy you are. And you know much more than the banker. That's your private information. So there's always informational imperfection. How do you design a system that deals with that informational imperfection? In your paper, you alluded to a very interesting example of diaspora networks. If you've ever, through history, merchant communities had these networks where they would have better information of where the market is, what sort of opportunities are available. If you're thinking about Southeast Asia, there's huge literature on Hadrami merchants, how they used to trade. In Malaysia, you have the sort of Chinese merchants. The overseas Chinese have created a lot of the Pakistani diaspora in UK. If you go to Azad Kashmir, you could see, how that diaspora network kind of facilitates or sometimes obstructs certain things. So how important is informational imperfection? And clearly, a lot of your examples, diaspora networks, but also a lot of powerful clubs and networks which exist. Davos is a club. Doha Forum is a club where all the people meet. And I would say even Oxford, having taught there for 20 years, you realize, they're closed communities. They're privileged clubs. And once you become member of a club, you have very different access to information and opportunities. How much of that informational imperfection feeds into this debate?
So I think that challenge of informational asymmetry or imbalance is absolutely there in lots of these systems. Now, clubs are not necessarily bad things. There are some clubs where you have to pay a lot of money to get in, and you have to have very shiny shoes if you go to an army club. But there are some clubs where, like Thinkfest, where there's no price of admission. Everybody's welcome. So you can have different forms of clubability, different forms of membership. Some allow access, some are more restrictive on access. And it's definitely the case, by the way, that Sifarish exists as much in Washington, DC or London as elsewhere, but it's more through informal networks rather than necessarily through a structure like the Braderie system, for example, or potential familial networks, extended familial networks. So I think if the concept of these networks, if the concept of Sifarish effectively is universal, the way in which it manifests does have particular characteristics, depending where you are, depending what kind of society you're in, depending whether you're talking about being a private banker in Dubai or whether you're talking about being a Kashmiri trader. In fact, one of the interesting things here is think about the history of Hundi and Hawala. The history of Hundi and Hawala is actually the history of banking. It's a history of cross-border payments and banking. But it was viewed as kind of illegitimate, right? What was legitimate was the bank on the Bund, right? Not the family networks. But even in the 18th century, Kashmiri traders, for example, were present in Lahore, Delhi, and Lhasa in Tibet. And you could actually transfer money, you could take promissory notes, basically early Hundi, early Hawala, between Kashmiri traders in those three cities. That's banking. It's the same. But it depended on the trust element, which was the informational difference on it. So I think you have these networks everywhere. If I just add one personal note, one of the most exclusive clubs in Washington, D.C. is called the Cosmos Club. And you'd always know because you got free combs if you went to the bathroom. And as you can see, because I'm Ganja Sab, this particular benefit from being a club member felt a bit less useful.
Great. So, sort of building on from that point, I mean, the idea that we have less information than some other actors, particularly in the state, and the state is inaccessible, don't you think that there would be an incentive for those who manage and control the state to keep it inaccessible because they could gatekeep it? If everything was predictable, accessible, the state services, I mean, I use, for example, the UK Gov website. I mean, everything is accessible on whether you are using your ID card, your passport, license, anything, your NHS card, it's all a single website, very extremely easy to use. But in many developing countries where the state actors who control the state want to keep it inaccessible because it's that gatekeeping that increases their power. How does that dimension play?
No, you have a point, definitely. But I think over the years, now even in a country like ours, a lot of good things have happened, and mainly due to digitization. You see, now it is coming in very fast, and it could be ID card. Nadra has played a great role, very positive role. So you don't have to run around to find where to vote, what is my voters list number, and it's all digital. I think one answer to minimize Safarish and make it a egalitarian, equality-based systems is to digitize. The least of the human interaction is now the call of the day. It used to be probably the other way around, that you need to have a human contact, accessibility and interaction, and we always thought it was good to know somebody and be with somebody. But now, if you laid out your systems, which the West has done in many ways very well, that is why it's all on the website, it's all there, and the systems come into play. So I think, but having said that, even in the West, lobbying and mafias and people playing